Hi, I'm Manny Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS legal hotline lawyer, and I'm joined for a final time in this video series. I think it's the final time. Who knows where the series will go? By
Ken Sachs. Happy to be here.
Form 35 expert extraordinaire. So,
Yes.
You and I had said at the end of the last video that we were finished talking about the negotiation period, but we weren't.
Right.
Because we left the viewers hanging. We'd covered what seller's options are with respect to accepting buyer's request, satisfies the inspection contingency. Seller can counter what that means to the buyer. But we never talked about what happens if seller rejects or just never answers at all. So we need to get to that. But before we do, there was something else that we also need to cover.
Okay.
When the buyer has received the seller's counter, let's still deal with that scenario. Seller doesn't accept, seller counters and says, I won't do 5, I'll do 3 things. And buyer wants to go back to seller and ask for more and actually make a formal counter and ask for more. Using the Form 35R, buyer would use the third section, right?
Yes.
Okay, and when you check the box on that third section, the language says, buyer has asked seller to make the repairs on the attached page. There's no more blank lines to write on Form 35R, right?
We're out of space.
Right. So what is buyer broker supposed to write on for that?
A Form 34.
Okay. So that would be an okay thing to
Yes.
do. Write the buyer's or I shouldn't use that word, but write the buyer's counter offer on a Form 34, attach it to that Form 35R, right?
Yes.
Now, what if seller doesn't accept that and buyer says, okay, I want to make a different counter. I'm still within my 3 days because we know that
Doesn't repeat.
it doesn't repeat. So buyer's got until 9 p.m. on that third day, and buyer's kind of going into a little bit of a panic mode here, and because seller hasn't accepted their counter, so they want to try again and write a different counter. What form would they use to do that? I'm going to suggest that they would pull out a clean Form 35R. They would go back to that third section. I understand that some instructors are saying, go back up to the first section and start over with the first section. Don't do that. Don't do that. You've already worked through the first section. Seller's already made a counteroffer. You're in the third section. If you need to pull out a Form 35R and start with another counteroffer back to the seller's counter, then mark that same box on the third section of 35R, attach another Form 34, and in the delivery of the new Form 35R and attached Form 34, withdraw or revoke the buyer's first request and replace it with this new one, right?
Well, how confusing would it be to go back to the first section of the 35R?
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
No.
Okay. All right, so we're done with that discussion. Okay. So let's go back to what if seller rejects. Seller just says, I'm not making any concessions, I'm making any repairs.
Right, so that's that second section in the 35R where seller responds. In this case, seller says, I reject, I'm not doing anything.
Right. So I didn't set that up well. So where we are in this transaction is buyer has made their initial request for repairs, and seller's only response back to buyer is to say, not making any concessions. I reject your request. Right.
So now we, again, are in the buyer reply period deadline, those 3 days. And
they never repeat.
And they don't repeat. They don't repeat. It's the cliff. You're going off the cliff. It doesn't repeat. What I see, well, seeing it one time is too much, but what I see is that a lot of listing agents will then consider the contract terminated or dead when the seller responds that way. And usually because they have another buyer that they want to engage with because they're willing to pay more money. So then they'll go and draft a contract and sign around a contract with another buyer because seller said they won't do anything.
Okay, so we should have prefaced that discussion by saying, this is wrong, right?
Yes.
Don't do this, listing brokers. I often summarize it with this. Seller has no ability under buyer's inspection contingency to terminate the transaction. There's no way that seller ever can terminate the purchase and sale agreement based on buyer's inspection contingency.
No,
right?
The contract's not dead. The seller's just saying, no. Okay, buyer, what are you going to do now? Right. The ball is back in your court.
Not going to make any, seller says, I'm not going to make any repairs. That does not mean seller has terminated the transaction. Ball's back in buyer's court. I agree with you.
Absolutely.
Buyer's got those 3 days. So now we're right back to where we were a few minutes ago. Buyer can either terminate the agreement. Buyer's got 3 days to do something, which could include terminating the agreement accepting seller. Oh no, I'm sorry. Seller said they wouldn't make any repairs. So buyer's 3 options are terminate the agreement, proceed to closing without any repairs by seller, or try to get seller to agree to something else. But if by the end of those 3 days at 9 p.m. seller hasn't agreed to something else, seller's choice and buyer's choice at 5 minutes to 9 p.m. on that third day is to terminate the agreement or proceed to closing with no repairs.
Yeah, and just a side note, buyer brokers, don't explain that situation to your buyer at 8:45 p.m. on Friday. Fair? Communicate, have that conversation with them, start prepping them. Don't surprise them. It's already emotional enough.
And don't really wait until 8:55 p.m. to deliver it either, because
Correct.
sometimes there's a problem with your email delivery. Offline, server is offline.
Right.
Okay, so the only seller response we haven't talked about yet then is the seller who just does
nothing. Seller never responds, which is a response, kind of. They just don't respond.
So in our scenario, seller's response was due, I think in the formula we were using,
Must've been
buyer
Tuesday.
had delivered on Monday, seller's response was due Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 9 p.m.
Okay.
So seller's response is due on Thursday at 9 p.m.
Okay.
And by 9:01, we've got nothing.
Nothing.
And by 9 a.m. the next morning, we've got nothing. So buyer broker, what are you telling buyer?
So we, again, are in that buyer reply period deadline. Those 3 days, using the default time periods, 3 days, buyer, where seller didn't respond. We're in these 3 days now, so same thing. Come to an agreement with the seller or terminate by
Okay.
the third day, 9 p.m.
So let's count those days then. The seller's 3 days, had seller responded, their response was due by 9 p.m. We just counted Thursday,
On
right?
Thursday.
So buyer's 3 days include when?
Friday,
Friday,
Monday, Tuesday.
assuming Monday and Tuesday are both business days.
Not
Friday,
holidays,
Monday,
correct.
Tuesday.
Right.
Right? Tuesday at 9 p.m., that's the cliff.
Drop dead.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. And so the fact that seller doesn't respond, as Ken said, is a response. That is the same thing as a rejection. To not respond at all is for seller to reject buyer's request for repairs. So buyer brokers, make sure that you have calendared these dates. Here was something I wanted to talk about in the very first video, and I'm glad I just thought of it. When in the transaction should buyer broker calendar the end of the initial inspection period, the 10 days, which time the initial inspection period will end? When is the right time for buyer broker to count those days and calendar that?
Mutual acceptance.
Time and mutual acceptance. Buyer brokers, please don't wait thinking that you'll count them later, or that you have a good idea in your head and you don't really need to count them. Sit down with a calendar and count the days at the time of mutual acceptance, and calendar the date on which buyer's initial inspection period ends. And when that happens, then calendar the very next date. Is it going to be the 5 days additional inspection period? Is it more than 5 days? Whatever you negotiated, calendar your additional inspection period. Once you get into negotiations, calendar those 3 day periods so that you don't run the risk of buyer missing that period. Do you think that it would be safe for buyer broker to count on listing broker reminding them?
Sorry. No.
Right.
No.
Never.
No, if the buyer broker is going to drive off the cliff, they're going to drive off the cliff.
And buyer brokers, don't rely on whatever date the listing broker has told you is the end of the time period either. Not because I think that the listing broker is going to intentionally deceive you, but the listing broker could be wrong.
Right.
Rely on your own good judgment, and if you have any question as to how you calculate the days, go get help from your managing broker.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Are we really done with the negotiations this time?
I think we are.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want the house now.
Well, too bad, because we've gotten to 9 p.m. on
Right.
Friday night. You're stuck, pal.
Okay.
Okay, so now the question is, seller has agreed to make some repairs.
Yes.
What does that mean? What does that look like based on the form?
So
wait a minute.
okay.
I know I said we were going to do this in 4, but I really think this is a good time to break on
Okay.
this video. We're going to have one more. This is going to be a 5 video series, and we're going to pick up the boilerplate language in the Form 35 and what brokers need to know about the boilerplate language so they can properly counsel their clients.
All
Okay,
right.
fair
Yeah,
enough?
Sounds good.
If you have questions between now and then, send an email to me. Please don't do this quickly, because heaven knows we're going to need another video if you ask questions about this particular series. But that's okay, really, if you want to. Send me a question, legal hotline at warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.